you referred to the fact that this approach has been tested in the States, electronic issues, but it's quite utilised. So, and is it something that hasn't really been tried here? Is this about the way that you're doing it that's different compared to how it's been done elsewhere? And are there things that you found that are culturally different, would have major differences in how it would work here? That was one question I had. The other thing was around the partnerships, because you mentioned that you've got good partnership arrangements and that they're very involved in it. I'd love to hear more about what their role would be in this. Yeah. The third thing is just that this in a nutshell for me sounds like an interesting new tool that you want to develop as a form of social research, social marketing. It's a tool to do something else, to actually tackle something. How can others help you do that? You talked about the university that you worked with last year. How can you draw on the facilities around you to make it really successful? Who would provide what?
Yeah, okay. Yes, we worked very closely with Professor Jerry Stoker at Southampton University. In the past, these sorts of techniques, especially in the States, it's been more of a written DVD, written issues book. So I think they drew together pieces of literature, things that people had written, rather than a film version, if you like. So it's still getting people's statements, still getting people different views in the room, but it hadn't been tested out in sort of creating a piece of film with lots of different people's views and talking heads and put together in that way. So that's how it was slightly different from the way that they'd done it in the States. It has had quite a long-term history and proved to be quite successful, but just for whatever reason hadn't really caught on in this country. It works incredibly well in the sense that you're able to make sure that you do get a wide range of different views and voices in a room, which you can't rely on if you just hold an open meeting. Particular sorts of people are attracted to public meetings, which means that you're often missing representation from a wide range of people in your community. So it is a way of really getting a lot more views heard, particularly by decision makers, by our councillors.
Culturally, I think the role of the councillors is quite important too, because that's what we sort of experimented with Jerry Stoker and his colleagues, and presenting back to councillors first on a very non-provocative issue, we thought, which was how can we best engage with local people? How can we better engage with them? Not much problem there, you'd think, but actually, it was quite contentious when we used the actual issues book. That's why we're seeking expert help for support on such a difficult issue as antisocial behaviour. And councillors, I think, do benefit from having more voices in the room when it comes to decision making and looking at specific issues. And that's why culturally, I think it is a sort of different way of approaching something in this country.
What you're clearly about is trying to get to a position in which you've got a spread of opinion. So I think I've got a series of questions that are related. Yes. One is the question about the sampling, yes, which is an issue that we have anyway in terms of providing policy advice to members. But there's a question about the sampling. There's a question about the editing in terms of the way in which the information is presented, because you talk at one point about the need potentially to have actors actually, taking a role here because of some of the sensitivity of some of the issues. But you also talk, and I was particularly struck by this, that we'd like the material to be provocative but not offensive in any way, and a balanced view would need to be presented. And so this point about the editing and the balance seems to me to be quite fundamental. I've got another question which I'd like to come on to in a minute, but it'd be very interesting to hear your observations on that.
Well, I think we have set out a certain framework here. There is a scope to this in the sense that we're talking about intergenerational, and the balance would be that. So it wouldn't be balanced if we had 10 older people talking about their views and experiences of living in Wiltshire and what they think of young people around pro and anti-social behaviour, and then we only had a couple of young people. I don't think that we can make it too complex. I think we need to be saying, well, that's the scope of it. In the previous project, we spoke to people from existing groups, but then we also, in some cases, almost by word of mouth, wanted to seek out others who perhaps weren't in formal groups. So, for example, we really wanted to talk to some farmers, and the farmers we interviewed in the end were through people that, networks and such, but not formal organisations. And actually the point of this is also about getting views into the ring that you wouldn't normally hear, and therefore you do need to step outside of some of those existing formal groups. Do you want to say a bit more about sampling?
Well, I do think, it's this question of who represents whom, and, you go right back, and nobody can really clearly represent everybody or a certain group anyway, but we need to test our sampling framework quite rigorously and defend it quite rigorously to be able to defend it. I think that there are specific groups within Wiltshire that would be quite interesting to look at in depth and get behind, like the military sort of presence, for instance, which can be quite difficult to get to the wives and on the garrison and things like that. So people with learning disabilities. I mean, as we've said, we've got ready-made forums too, but it's also getting behind that to the people who don't tend to be included.
John Tizard, the member of the advisory panel. Have you engaged with any of the opinion research companies and experts? Because it seems to me, in a sense, one way in which you would get a more representative sample is to use some of the techniques that a Mori or a Populous or similar would use.
We haven't used, we haven't spoken to Mori or any of the big external ones yet. We do have a People's Voice and a Tomorrow's Voice, which we mentioned slightly earlier, which are among the most established actually in the country and the largest. So our People's Voice has over 6,000 members, and our Young People's Voice, Tomorrow's Voice, has over 3,000 members. And we recently, in our recent survey with Tomorrow's Voice, we had a whole lot of different questions around antisocial behaviour, and we're proposing, and we regularly sample actually antisocial behaviour with People's Voice. So we do have that for Wiltshire, but actually that's a very good suggestion, very good idea.
Well, we do keep our eye on what Ipsos Mori are coming out with as well, but we also have close affiliations with the universities, like we said, Southampton, Bristol, University of West England, etc. So, we do talk to them.